the founder of AdLife Technologies. And this is the Quest 3. It's one of the devices we use to capture mobility and to give people motivation to do daily exercise on the simplest level. And on the other level, it generates mobility reports and makes life easier for clinicians.
Wow. Okay, so that looks like quite an expensive piece of equipment. How do you get this out to the end user?
And well, actually in the virtual reality space, this is the cheapest piece of hardware out there within the professional spectrum. That because it's funded through Meta, who actually...
Through what?
Meta.
Okay.
Previously known as Facebook.
Yes.
Has put $100 billion of research into virtual reality technologies. And so our hardware costs for this version is under $1,000, and for our other version is under $500.
Wow.
And it has millimeter accurate fine motor skill tracking. And so you can actually use your hands without needing a controller and actually physically touch and activate menus by using these. And it's got these spatial cameras.
Yes. So obviously you and I met quite some years ago when the technology was at a much more basic level. How has the technology evolved to enable this now, where you don't need to have things attached to your hands and things like that?
Yeah, so ultimately this has a mobile processor, the same as a mobile phone does. But mobile processors have come so far, like the iPhone 6, I think, exceeded the amount of technology in the Apollo spacecraft, for example.
Wow.
And so this can actually capture billions of different points in a spatial environment, including the height of the room, the distance of objects to make sure you're safe, but also capture every part of your fingers moving. And we take that into the system and we calculate on the chip the rest of your body movement by using your velocity of your head and hands and your shoulder movement. And we can make a full body map from the waist up.
Amazing.
And we do that multiple times per second.
Yeah. So it's just inputting that data through a visual, through the visual spectrum, or are other spectrums used?
No. It's it uses infrared actually to track, and so it doesn't get affected by other things in the environment, and they also don't affect each other if you have multiple in one room. But it basically casts, it shoots ultra infrared onto you, and it captures that, and then it puts a skeleton back into your hand, reskins that in a virtual environment, then generates velocity and a few other things. And so it sounds complicated, but ultimately it's just tracking your movement.
Yes.
That's just the tip of the iceberg.
And the speed at which you're moving.
Yeah, the two things that have made this much more advantageous in the past is not having to plug it into anything.
Yes.
It automatically updates, it automatically sends data to the cloud, but it's running at over 100 frames a second. So when you're actually looking around, you're not seeing any flickering, which was one of the biggest problems generating headaches in the virtual reality space.
Yes.
And so it's imperceivable to the human eye, something faster than that. It's way faster than television, which is only about 24. But because it's a spatial computer, you're obviously more sensitive when you're physically moving. And so the boring part of it is that it has all these different functions and things, but the actual practical part is it means more accurate data, less dizziness, and it also allows us to make more realistic light sources, a few other things like that. We're working on the holy grail of these simulations are like fluids. We want to teach people how to go to the toilet, wash their hands, brush their teeth, and simulating fluids.
What first initiated you to step into this realm? What inspired you to go in this direction as an academic?
Really, it started with the technology. When I saw it as a kid in 1990, I saw this and I was like, you could live in this other world. It was horrible at the time, and it cost $1 million per computer. And I was just more interested in the idea that you could be so deep into an environment. And then I started looking into it on a more psychological area later, where we were seeing a lot of empathy. The biggest companies in the world to use virtual reality originally was Worldwide Fund for Nature and Amnesty International. because people would empathize with someone in a refugee camp if they could live that experience.
Yes.
And so they kind of proved the psychological value of these things. Like people would save a rainforest if they could see the rainforest, or be immersed in the rainforest, where we're desensitized to violence and destruction on television, for example. But then I saw that we could capture body movement, and then really the idea of actually capturing body movement to retrain what I was like, well, what can we train while capturing body movement would be body movement itself. And then by pure coincidence or life or mainly statistics, 2 people close to me had 2 severe strokes. One of them died soon after, and one, my uncle, he lived for 18 months. And ultimately, his life would even worse, possibly, if you can think of like that. I kind of felt like he had a much tougher life post-stroke than even our friend that died, because he was stuck in this limbo of not knowing whether he'd ever recover.
Yes.
I went to live with him in India. We had to take 4 people, getting him into a car, in a wheelchair, going across a big city like Mumbai. And it just it immediately all dawned on me, all these things stacked up, that people needed to be more independent in the home, complete some of those tasks. There's a significant part of the population that doesn't have any funding to go and see a face-to-face specialist anyway.
Yeah.
And so in that case, if you're one of the lucky few, we can make it a more effective face-to-face session if you're doing it. And for the people that don't have it, like in India they call it the sub-tier 3 city, which would be doesn't have a dedicated hospital. These are up to 250,000 people living in some of those areas. They need tools that can go out and be used by people in their community that can be trained to use them. They may not have dedicated medical backgrounds. And in places like Australia, where we don't have those same limitations, we still find the exact same problems where people get left out in disability. We don't know why some people get money and some people don't get money, and how do you prove that you need help? And then by looking at the data play that comes out of this, we can actually say who puts effort into rehabilitation, why they're putting effort in, what they excel in, and how that is kind of translated to activities of daily living. And where they need help, really. And we can actually say they lose motivation at this certain point. It's either time or effort. So really just trying to help them and help their families understand them, help them communicate more effectively about what they need. And then also make the government at the end of that story realize who needs help and why.
And I can imagine, because I've of course experienced this piece of technology, I can imagine that putting this on and being in that virtual environment would motivate people in ways that maybe they wouldn't be if they were just faced with purely mechanical rehabilitation. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the famous story, when I was a young kid, my grandmother had a stroke, and I didn't fully understand it at the time, because I guess talking about a family member stroke wasn't the norm at the time. But I found out later that you're supposed to open a drawer 10 times and open a door 10 times, and that was the
rehabilitation.
that was the best they had at the time. If you wanted to put resistance, you got someone to hold on to the other side of the door. If you had to reach out, particularly above you, you get tired very quickly. It's one of those things they say, if you hold your hands out for more than a minute, you'll almost start screaming.
Yes.
But if there was a reason, like let's say a bird came and landed on my hand and I didn't want to lose the bird, I would hold my hand there.
The motivation.
Or if there was a real apple in a tree, or at least the perception of an apple in a tree, and I wanted to pick apples, it's your brain immediately gives up on this world. We're not that attached to this world, as it turns out.
No.
As soon as you give the brain another world, it's quite happy to continue living in that world. And it believes what it sees. And so it just thinks you're picking apples at that point.
So what you're doing in effect is circumventing reality.
Yeah, and it's really, there's a thing called mixed reality, and now we're kind of bolstering reality.
Because you've got augmented reality now
yeah,
with these things as
so
well. With the cameras in front.
So they've actually rebranded both of them as extended reality.
Yeah.
So the blurred lines between what's augmenting, which is seeing you, plus there's an apple here, and I can still chat to you and pick apples.
Yeah.
And so, which means that we can still have functional conversation and, you know, a version of eye contact, and like perceived eye contact for the user at the very least in a clinical situation.
Yeah.
But then I don't have to be relearning the environment. But for deep, like neuro reorganization, it's better to be completely removed from an environment that reminds you of the normalities of life. And so if you want to really reprogram yourself, you need to be taken away. Yeah. And so usually that requires not having external stimulus. And so being at home is a much easier way for you to deep dive into a psychological journey through virtual reality than when there's 100 people standing around you or even a clinician. So it really means that there's a new pathway of addressing these things that can only be done properly when you're by yourself.
So tell me what the importance of a conference like this is to technology like yours.
I think nerds like us hide in a box sometimes.
Nerds like you.
Well, I'm obsessed with getting the data accuracy and the fluidity of the system and how easy it connects to the Wi-Fi and things. All the boring aspects, like perfect, because I know these people have limited time. They don't want to walk into a session feeling frustrated.
Yeah.
But really, it's then actually I don't get much chance to actually meet people that are actually doing the work.
When you're saying doing the work, are you talking about the practitioners?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I meet with quite a few users, but ultimately, once again, it's really people coming up to me and telling me what they want. This is where these events really turn out to be the most valuable, because someone says, I work with these people, or have you thought about this, or we need this, or we've looked into this but we're still confused about it, and when we can start a conversation. And so the whole point of this existing is that people know it exists and they can use it if they want to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daish.
And here's our little mascot, Addie. She's very cute.
Yes.
And if you go into virtual reality and you're at home by yourself, she will come and play games with you. She's very cute.
There you go. So you get a bonus friend.
Yeah. So you can remember Add Life by Addie.
Okay, Add Life and Addie. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daish. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this show. If you want to get in touch with us, just email info@anewyou.au. See you next week.